This week, we're excited to release our interview with Randy Poster, originally recorded at Sear Sound in January of 2020. As a renowned music supervisor for film and television, Randy is known for his work with directors Wes Anderson, Martin Scorsese, Todd Phillips, and Sam Mendes, among many others. He has had his hand in a countless number of works, including The Irishman, The Queen's Gambit, Boardwalk Empire, The Hangover, Divergent, The Wolf of Wall Street, Lost, The Grand Budapest Hotel, Tiger King, and Joker, just to name a few. With a career that spans over 2 decades, multiple genres, and several awards, listen in as he chats with our hosts about how he got into music supervision, the nuts and bolts of the process, and more.
It's great to have you.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Thanks
to
for
New
having
York.
me, guys.
Welcome back.
Wait, welcome back?
Well, he was out of town.
Oh, where were you?
Los Angeles, California.
Working on
Working on a couple of movie projects.
Oh,
yeah.
great. Anything you could talk about, or is it?
Yeah, working on this film called Power, directed by Ariel Schulman and Henry Joost, starring Jamie Foxx. That'll come out, I guess, sometime later this year, maybe the spring, maybe the fall. Kind of a sci-fi thriller.
Mm-hmm.
These are guys, New Yorkers, who directed a movie that I worked on called Nerve. I guess maybe now it was 2 years ago. Terrific young directors.
And so it's shot and...
Yeah, it's all shot. And so again, it's kind of VFX driven. So that's still in process. And we're just still sort of working on sort of a temp score to kind of get the movie ready for a preview audience.
So how often does the temp score live? Like, is it always replaced, or do you ever get attached to
Well,
stuff?
I mean, just to sort of clarify what that is for people who don't know. In the process of making a movie, you're editing and you need music to serve as the score. And oftentimes either it's before you even have a composer or you've just hired a composer who's working sort of on sketches or trying to find the direction. And so you put in a temp score, which is like temporary music, where for the most part you're using film scores from other movies to sort of approximate the element that you want to bring to it, or
and
to
you
give
work
some
with the
semblance
director
of it.
to find
that? Or you work with the music editor. You know, we had a really fine music editor named Brian Lawson, who I think is the best at doing these things out in L.A. And he really is an artist in terms of the way he puts these pieces together. You know, where sometimes a piece from one movie just in one sequence will go to another piece of music by another composer, or there's overlay, or there's editing. So there's a real technique to it.
And then do you show that to the composer?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's an indication to the composer
Point
in terms
them
of
in a
what.
direction?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's the clearest way to indicate what you're looking for, or what the particular piece of music needs to do.
Right. And who usually picks the composer?
Well, I mean, there's generally a conversation between all the active parties, the studio, the producers, the director, myself, you know, and then just generally just trying to see, like, is the person that you have in mind available? And then if they're not available, who else might be available?
Do people do demos for that stuff?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do. I mean, it's not a routine, you know. I mean, generally when a composer has a significant body of work, that seems to speak to...
Like a Hans Zimmer or something, or is he?
Yeah. I mean, you know, somebody like that. But even beyond that, I mean, there are a lot of composers who've done. You know, if you've done 20 or 30 movies, there's generally a basis for an assessment.
But what about finding like younger?
Yeah, I think younger composers are always willing to say, "Hey, let me try some." You know, a composer is sometimes limited by, or we're all limited by, the things we get hired to do.
Yeah, that's
you know.
right.
So if a particular composer hasn't worked in a particular genre,
That's a very good.
You know, then maybe they're willing to say, "Hey, look, you know, I haven't done this before, but it's not because I can't do it."
Right.
And so here's a little bit of a demonstration of how I would do it.
Right.
So that happens. I mean, I think certain composers have won jobs for themselves by being open to, you know, putting something together for a particular movie. Say, send me a sequence and let me show you what I can do or what I have in mind.
And sometimes it's not like we're talking composers like maybe more classical, but is it sometimes where Trent Reznor would do something like that? You have an idea. Wow, maybe this person's aesthetic is right for this thing, and maybe it's not a score, or not a classical score.
Yeah. I mean, I think there tends to be, I think there's sort of a movement away from classical scores. I think there's less reliance on themes than maybe there once were. And I think people are open to sort of non-traditional musical elements.
Right.
But then when you're in genre, of a thriller or something cyber in content, there needs to be, there sort of needs to be certain kind of tropes and rules that somehow need to be kind of followed in terms of the building of suspense.
Right. And so, like needle drops, right?
Right.
Like you obviously...
What's a needle drop? Sorry.
Where you don't get a new piece of music, you use a record from...
I mean, basically now it's funny because I've been doing this so long. Is like needle drop was a word or a term that people used to use early on in my career because it was sort of basically indicates like where you would play a record, really,
Right.
And then as that kind of fell out of, somehow that terminology fell out of fashion, but it's kind of re-emerged. Because I just generally would call it source music.
Source music.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it more expensive, or is there a downside to using source music? Is there a reason why you went away from that for a while? Or
No. I mean, it's just the terminology. Just the terminology.
Yeah.
I mean, there are more songs used in movies than ever before.
Would you say that Marty was the forerunner of doing that?
I certainly think he opened the floodgates for using songs, and he's certainly a director who is open to relying primarily on songs for the musical element in the film. I mean, we together, Stuart, you and I worked on The Irishman, which is predominantly songs.
Right.
I mean, there is a very precise, calibrated score element that Robbie Robertson composed, but it really is, a small portion of the musical element.
Right.
So, I mean, I think Marty has been the director who's been most prominent and most fearless in using songs, and maybe in more recent decades now, I guess, Tarantino is
I see. Right,
Tarantino is a filmmaker who generally relies on pre-recorded music, even largely as Marty has done, scores from other movies.
Yeah. Oh, really?
you said the word fearless.
Yeah.
Explain why it's fearless.
Fearless, I think it's fearless in the sense that there's a bold dynamic where he plays the music loud and he's not necessarily concerned with the notion of like, well, where is the music coming from?
Right.
Or it's necessarily built into some kind of visual reality.
Right.
I mean, one of the things that we talked about, or I talk about, is that there's a sequence in The Wolf of Wall Street where we were lucky enough, we got Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings to sort of be the band, the wedding band.
Right.
And we recorded a bunch of songs with them for them to perform on camera. And we did. And, in the wedding, they do perform a couple songs. And then in the midst of sort of a dancing sequence with the band playing, Marty had this idea that like a Bo Diddley song would just sort of take over.
I remember that.
And, there it is. You're seeing a band playing and they're not, Bo Diddley not among them. And it just works because it's this kind of like inspiration, force of will, boldness.
Yeah,
Just
boldness.
Like not really,
fearless.
like, I can do it. It's a movie. I can do it.
And speaking of Marty, you've worked with a lot of directors many times. Mm-hmm. Like there are guys you work with, or gals or guys, who you have gone like the distance with a lot of these people. So when you start a new movie, you obviously kind of dial up their references or their tastes.
Well, I think that, the directors that I've worked with the most, Wes Anderson, Todd Phillips, I think I've done 10 movies with both of them. Scorsese, I've done 8 projects with. Each movie is different, really. Right. So each movie...
But someone like Marty, kind of where his groove is.
Well, I think sometimes, because we talk about sort of the musical recipe, whether it's set in period or, for instance, with The Irishman, where he talked a lot about sort of these popular orchestral music, which I guess is kind of called easy listening in a way, whether it was Jackie Gleason or Percy Faith.
Right.
He wanted to live in that a little bit to render era, but also to sort of, I think, have some kind of musical depth and kind of these lush arrangements.
Right.
And so within that was sort of a world of music that was meant for this particular film. I mean, whether instinctively, at a certain point, I know if there are certain sort of gems that I know that somebody's going to respond to. I mean, I could probably, sometimes I'll predict, say like, oh, he's going to love this one. But then sometimes I'm not right,
Right. Like, for instance, someone like Wes.
Right.
Obviously, you and Wes pretty much started together.
Right.
How did you meet him?
Wes was finishing Bottle Rocket.
First movie.
And yeah.
Amazing.
And we were introduced by somebody who thought we would get along. And almost immediately I helped him put together the soundtrack album for Bottle Rocket at that point. And then almost immediately we just segued into work on Rushmore. And we've sort of been working, and we've sort of been working ever since. I mean, I always say about with Wes is that, I think a lot of the musical work that we do happens between movies, where we sort of trade songs back and forth and have certain pieces of music that we hold on to sometimes for nearly a decade. I mean, we had for Fantastic Mr. Fox, we played Bobby Fuller's Let Her Dance at the end of the movie, which is something like we were holding, for 10 years and just waiting for the right moment to use it and hoping that like nobody else would use it in the meantime.
How did the Bowie song end up on?
Many songs.
Well,
Life Aquatic.
But wasn't it mostly Life on Mars? There were a bunch of different versions.
Well, in Life Aquatic, which is what you're talking about, where we have a character who plays David Bowie songs. Sal George played 13 David Bowie songs. And that was really, it was interesting, was that during that period, Wes was living in New York, and we would meet on Sundays when he was writing the script, and I would read the new pages. And one afternoon, reading the pages, there was a line in the script that said, Pele goes on deck and performs a David Bowie song in Portuguese. And that was it. That was the only only indicator. And then we were fortunate enough to find Sal George, who was just a miraculous interpreter of music.
And did he have some acting experience?
Yeah, he had been in City of God. The City of Gods, that's how we'd seen him, and then he had auditioned. But really, it was the magic of Sal George that really made it possible, where all of a sudden these David Bowie songs became bossa nova. And George really he was not really grounded in the material. He'd known a couple of David Bowie songs, but basically was sort of improvising in terms of finding sort of a style for it. And basically, in different locations at the end of the day, Wes would say, okay, let's, George, do another one, and
on the boat.
Yeah, on the boat. And then, or in different locations. And then Life on Mars actually does, the Bowie version appears in the movie.
Yeah.
Right.
And then 2 versions of Queen Bitch are in the movie. And Bowie was very, he embraced it. He was open to it, and they were very positive and friendly about it.
Did you have to play him Sal's versions?
No, we got permission before we sent them to him when we were finished, and he was effusive.
Right.
Great.
But Wes is interesting in that, like, all of his movies, there is no template. He just is so eclectic.
Yeah.
Balalaikas.
Yeah. I think he always wants to bring some sort of novel combination to it, or he has been more recently in the films. So, say we look at Darjeeling Limited, is that his idea was, well, let's just use the music that both Satyajit Ray composed and the music that Satyajit Ray had composed for his movies, and sort of led us to using some of the other Indian music that was in the films of Merchant Ivory and some related things. But that was pretty much like just sort of a predisposition or, pre-imagination.
Right.
And what you find with the great directors is that, they're willing to stand by their convictions or stand by their decisions. And we just went all in on that.
Right.
And you're right. I mean, there was with Budapest Hotel, this notion of putting together a balalaika orchestra, or with
really great.
or with Isle of Dogs, where we really anchored it in taiko drumming,
Right.
and Stuart, because you worked on it in terms of Moonrise Kingdom, where we were doing all this sort of like drum corps drumming that we brought in as an element to the movie
That he really orchestrated himself.
Yeah, he for an untrained musician or a composer, Wes makes a major, significant contribution in terms of even how the music is put together.
I mean, in that movie, the music is stunningly effective to set all the scenes. It just makes it like you're watching the movie and it's like.
And
I mean, you're saying that, and I don't even know which movie you're talking about, and I'll agree to you.
Right. Well, I have to be honest and say I haven't seen all of his movies. I'm a huge fan, but there's a couple I haven't seen. But that one, to me, that's probably
which one?
Moonrise Kingdom.
Moonrise Kingdom.
Yeah.
It's really stuck with me.
But I mean, he orchestrated every move of every kind of instrument. Now you're going to play this. Now you're going to play that.
Yeah.
And then we cut it together and.
Yeah. Well, you know, we have a new film that we've just completed called The French Dispatch, which has, you know, maybe a little bit more of a traditional score to it in sections because it's an anthology. It's made up of related short films, and again, Alexander Desplat composed the score. But there are elements where Wes, you know, he's very specific and, you know, knows where he wants things to live and basically will choose the instruments that he wants to play.
Yeah.
And is a real musical force.
He really is.
I mean, there was a funny bit where we were doing, I think it was Budapest Hotel, where Wes wanted to do sections with just recorders. And so the musical contractor, the person who hires all the musicians, was talking to me about it. He says, well, if you want to use all recorders, you know, I mean, I think probably you want to really have some flutes because, you know, there's a certain limitation in the sound of the recorder. And you say like, no.
Right.
And we will not be using flutes.
Right.
When he says he wants to use just recorders, he's not hedging.
Yeah. And so, like you also, I mean, this is a pretty great year for a lot of the stuff you worked on, as are many years, but Joker too.
Right.
Was there a temp cello score?
Well, so Joker, you know, I really do think that if I look at it and strip it down to the essence of the film, to me, it's Joaquin and the score. Mm-hmm. I think for me, those are the dominate emotionally in the story. And again, Todd Phillips, another courageous character, didn't want to do anything really comic book traditional on any level, and wanted to really mine this isolated character, and made a commitment to Hilda very early on, who was a cellist, and she did some demos. Actually, that was a situation where she was willing to demonstrate a little bit just for the sake of getting this big job. And a lot of those demos were things that Todd played on set that really helped motivate Joaquin. If you remember, there are scenes where he's sort of in kind of a reverie, looking at himself in the mirror and kind of doing a dance. And those were things that were sort of prompted by the score, which is just really original. I mean, it sounds really, for a movie like this, you would never expect something that would say is so artistic in a way, or so kind of individual.
Was Smile in the script? Like, did he have a concept for using that?
You know, my memory will fail me in terms of that. I know that the Sondheim, Send in the Clowns, was something that we had to pursue very heavily before we started to shoot, because that was figured into the story. And I can't quite remember. I mean, we also recorded this great version of If You're Happy and You Know It that Stewart produced with Chaim Tenenbaum, that just sounded like a great old record.
Yeah, really fun.
And that was something that, you know, Todd specified. And then we had a lot of fun on the movie in terms of finding and recording the Murray Franklin theme show music. Again, I think it'd be surprising for people if they looked at it and studied it. There really was a lot of on-camera music in Joker.
Right. In very important scenes.
Yeah,
too.
And there was a sequence where we went and used the film score. Well, I guess Smile must have been, because there was the Charlie Chaplin. Obviously, there was the Charlie Chaplin, so that was obviously then part of it. But getting access to the recording of the score.
Yeah, how do you do that? How do you like get who Charlie Chaplin?
Well, Charlie Chaplin wrote that music, and so we had to get permission to use that. And then there was a more recent, I think it was probably 20, 25 years old, re-recording of it because they would
Oh,
they would go they would go and
in
they
Italy
would they
or
would
something,
right,
right.
they would play it.
Right.
They would have events where they would show the movie with a live orchestra playing the,
Oh, wow.
and that's sort of what we replicated.
Right.
And his name will escape me, and I'm sorry, but
The conductor?
the conductor, yeah,
Great, yeah.
who had done that original
Right.
recording. So the recording
Oh,
that
right,
we
he
used,
did the original.
he did the recording that
So
we
boy,
used.
that's a lot of like detective work.
Yeah, a little bit. It wasn't. It was less complicated to figure out what we wanted to use and who owned it than to just get it all together.
Do you ever come across something that you know you really want to use and you can't get it?
Very, very rarely.
rarely.
Very rarely.
Or
I mean, that's really what I sort of pride myself in, just sort of not taking no for an answer.
Right.
You know, sometimes there are things where what you run up against is no one will claim that they own it.
Right.
That's when it becomes like
So you
it's
can't-
not even
then
like
you-
somebody saying I won't give you permission.
Right.
It's like saying I don't. We can't find anybody who will say that.
So you're in
I own
complete
it.
risk.
You don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
you just end up making them an offer they can't
No,
refuse.
well, there's nobody.
or-
You can't make anybody.
I mean in the other situations.
Yeah, or you just you put it in proper context and you show the proper respect. And,
Well, at this point, though, you're
well, hopefully you're
your
working on
track
good,
record
you're
is-
working on good projects, and hopefully at least the body of work that I have at least will assure people that the music will be used thoughtfully
Right.
and used well and be
Right.
in good musical company. Every song is like a dysfunctional family. There's no blue book really. You can't say, this is what that song costs. And sometimes you have situations where, you're trying to license a song that was, some one-hit wonder from 1966. And you think, well, why would there be any issue in this?
Right.
And then it ends up like, well, the two guys from the band, they hate each other. One guy doesn't want the other guy to make any money.
And one guy doesn't want to make any money.
Right. or there's situations, where what's hard in terms of, say, with hip hop is that sometimes, they've never really fully worked out all the publishing splits. And so or they figure out, oh my God, there's 175% of this song, It's like, what do you do then? I mean, there are things that are impossible to license that you just know to avoid because...
like, for instance, Beatles?
No, just like things more. It's more like on the urban front where there was sampling. So it's like De La Soul or things that they have samples in them. They never worked it out. Nobody's going to work it out now. And so you just can't really use it. I mean, that's why certain things are not like available on Spotify or.
How often does someone ask you, like, what's the context of how the song is
Well,
going to
you always have to give them the. I mean, when you submit a request, it gives
tell
you
them
the
how
timing, how it's being used.
and what the subject matter is in the whole thing.
I mean, sometimes you try to elevate
Yeah, right.
the subject matter or the use.
What's the because having done so much stuff together, I know you're very lyric driven.
Right.
How often does a song maybe work musically, but you go, oh, there's this lyric that bumps you? Or,
Yeah, well, it happens. It happens whether it's either too specific or it's too specifically not specific.
Right.
Like, what's that? There's this great August Anna song. This great ballad that I would love to use in a movie, but then like finally the crescendo is like, please come back to Boston.
Right.
It's like, and then, you just like one of those things like Boston.
Right. Oftentimes lyrics
They can be, yeah. It's for me. I look. People get hung up on everything and anything about it. I know it's too well known. It's too obscure. It's again in terms of going back to what I said about Scorsese and fearlessness, is that people are always concerned. Oh, it fights the dialogue, and I've said before is that. I'd like to make T-shirts that say "Fight the Dialogue,"
Right.
and then again, you spend so much time mixing. You sit on a stage, getting the levels of the music to be what or get people to agree on the level of the music and balance with the dialogue. And then you go to a movie theater and you can't, it's playing out of one speaker.
Right.
And generally, like when you go to movie mixes, I generally have one note, play the music louder.
Right.
So,
Well, Randy usually has one note to me: make the vocal louder.
Right.
yeah, vocal up.
Vocal up. That's universal.
Does it ever happen where you go to a screening and you go, "Ooh, shit, maybe this can be better, or I got to swap this out," or usually done
with a finished movie, or when you're watching something in process?
In process.
Yeah, I mean, I come out of those things with notes about songs where I think that something's not working that I thought was working better.
Right.
You know, and especially when you're working, it's really hard when you're working in a really contemporary moment, where all of a sudden something that is relatively new just feels tired.
Right.
You know, and it's only 6 months old.
Right. Like one thing that always I'm not even sure if we ever discussed this, but Brian Jonestown Massacre is the song that starts every episode of Boardwalk Empire.
Right.
And we were religiously in 1920.
No,
whatever.
I know. Yeah, that was pretty
and that really, how did that come about? Or
well, I really had nothing to do with it, really. But if you liked it, I'll take credit for it. Anyway.
Well,
we liked it.
No, I mean, again, that was sort of, with title songs, it's a bit more of like sort of the marketing kind of, that's where I think the studio, which at that point was HBO, maybe had a little bit more leverage in terms of, the desire to say like, well, how do we make this feel like it is contemporary, or it doesn't feel like it's just a relic or a timepiece.
Right.
So I thought it was fine. I grew to like it.
I grew to like it too.
I grew to like it.
But
I mean, we fought it.
You did,
we fought it. Subsequently, I think it was right, and certainly didn't diminish the musical element.
No,
in the
I think
episodes.
it actually. I mean, I was startled the first time I heard it, and then by the second season, I was like expecting it.
Yeah. Well, since you brought it up, Boardwalk Empire was really, you and I worked so closely on Boardwalk Empire and recorded hundreds of songs. And I would say that was really one of the sort of greatest experiences in my career, just because it really gave us an opportunity to explore a really underknown musical era.
Yes.
That the first season of Boardwalk Empire was 1920, and nobody really was familiar with the music of that era, really. Even Marty said, I begin in 1925.
Right.
Wow.
And what was fun about that in terms of doing Boardwalk Empire 2 was that we became the experts. So we would say, no, this wouldn't be, or this wasn't right, or this is the song we should use, or this is the thing we should do. Where then when we segue into something like vinyl, the music of the golden era, the late 60s and the 70s, everybody's an expert.
Right.
Which makes it just much more challenging, the politics of it and the debate of it, because I'm not really, I certainly am very excited to collaborate with filmmakers. I'm not very excited to compromise, really. And so we did quite a bit of tussling on vinyl, just because people have so many, everybody has a history with so many songs that it's like hard to really discount it, but you have to sort of kind of overcome it.
But so on Boardwalk Empire, you kind of actually scored it in a way.
Yeah, we did.
Because the directors really weren't knowledgeable.
Well, everybody became more knowledgeable about it. And sometimes, we took our lead from the writers by virtue of the fact that saying, Eddie Cantor was going to be a character, or these real life historical musical figures were going to figure it. And so they would say, okay, well, what would be the best?
Right.
What would be the best song of to have them do? There really is very, very few things more fun than what we got to do on Boardwalk Empire.
But do you ever, I'll speak for myself, like being in music, to me there's an occupational hazard. I don't listen to music the way I listened when I was a kid.
Right.
Or before I started doing it.
Right.
And I know you listening to music day and night.
Right.
You have to because you work on so many projects. Every time you hear something, do you register it in a professional?
You know what? I think that one of the gifts that I've gotten is that I can still keep my civilian ears on a certain level. And so, as you know, I'm not a musician, and I don't write music. I don't play music myself, and I don't write music. I've always just loved it. If there's any sort of inherent skill that I bring to the process, it's just like I know what I like, and that's abided by me. And thankfully, I don't always listen as a mercenary. Certainly there are things that I clock, and I think, but I clock it thinking like, oh, that's a great song.
Right.
That's a great song.
Because unfortunately, very hard for me to go back to where I was when I just listened.
I've learned to disassociate. It's so good.
Right. Well, I know you're good at that.
I actually, every now and then, a record will come on that I've worked on, and I just enjoy it. I don't think about what it could have been, or I just don't. And even with other records, I don't listen to them critically.
Yeah. It's so funny that you say there's, I don't do many interviews, but this is probably my most repeated story in terms of an interview, which I will share with your audience as well. Yeah. So when we made the Royal Tenenbaums, there's a great sort of become an iconic sequence where Margot Tenenbaum, Gwyneth Paltrow, exits a bus to meet her brother Richie in slow motion, and we play These Days by Nico, right? Mm-hmm. And so we had whether it was the premiere or a special screening, Cameron Crowe went with Jackson Browne, right, who wrote the song, right? And so the scene comes on and plays through, and the story goes, or Cameron tells a story, that Jackson Browne elbows him, and he goes, "Man, I used to play just like that." And Cameron goes, "It is you. It is you. It is you." So that's a happy disassociation.
So funny.
So we've been talking about Randy making records. I'm working on movies and TV stuff, but you also produce records.
Right.
Big part of what you do.
Yeah.
Is that how you got into the movie thing? Or
No. The movie thing was from the beginning.
Right. But Randy's made some great records.
Yeah, so it's been fun. We've made a bunch of records, some tribute records. I made a record that I'm very proud of with the songs from the Civil War, which was just something I was really interested to try to do in working in the world of bluegrass and country music. I made a record. Beck asked me to produce a record of songs from his Song Reader, sort of an all-star version of that we really did together a few years ago. And this fall, I made a record of Hanukkah songs, new Hanukkah songs.
That to me was like, I can't believe you actually made it, and it's really good.
Wow.
But that must that had to be a challenge.
That was very hard to do. Yeah.
And
first of all, because people didn't think I was serious when I was telling them that I wanted to do it. But I mean, there was there isn't really like sort of a Christmas. There isn't a like kind of collection of standards. Right. So you really couldn't really throw songs at people and say, "Oh, well, listen, if you can't figure out what to do, maybe just do Baby It's Cold Outside."
In Yiddish.
But we had a lot of fun. We did a lot of original songs. I kind of leaned on the people I could lean on in terms of artists.
Where did the idea? You had the idea?
No, they came to you. Came to me and asked me if I wanted to do it.
And
that's great.
And when they did you immediately say yes, or did you?
I immediately said yes. I had just finished the soundtrack to Superfly, and I thought that was a great segue. Superfly to Hanukkah, but it took me another year. It took me an extra year to get the record done.
Because you were looking for original material.
Because I was trying to get original material, and also it was late, and it wasn't enough time to get people really to get it together where we could get it out in time.
It's called Hanukkah Plus.
Hanukkah Plus, because Hanukkah Plus it became Hanukkah Plus because I Jack Black, who I've worked with quite a bit, who I would say is a friend of mine, and a musical genius on top of everything else. I really needed him to come through for me to do a Hanukkah song, and so he. I woke up one morning and his manager wrote me and said, "I think you're going to be very happy." And they sent me 2 songs. And it was Oh Hanukkah and then a song called Chad Gadya, which is basically a Passover song. Right. So it was sort of like, well, I wanted to use both of them. And so it became Hanukkah Plus because there's also like a Passover bonus.
And that's out on Verve.
It's out on Verve Forecast.
But Jack's thing is kind of miraculous.
Yeah, it's cantorial, really.
But it's kind of funny but he's also got a really great voice.
Yeah, and Stuart and I worked with him very closely. There was a movie that we did a couple of years ago called The Polka King, where he played based on a true story, this polka artist, and we sort of watched him sort of transform into this character, and he lived in this character.
It's a crazy story too,
and just was really incredible.
And he sang.
I think you told me about.
Yeah, he sang all these. He became the band leader and the singer, and pretty spectacular. I mean, he belongs on Broadway or something.
He's the greatest.
You know, he really has like vocal chops that are pretty amazing. And you also have a commercial company.
Yes.
And you do
advertisements.
Nice. What do you do in your spare time?
Listen to music. What's your hobby?
I run a karate karate dojo in Bergenfield, New Jersey.
And do you have to stay involved in that, or do you have kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I have I don't have to touch everything that runs through Search Party, which is the advertising company, but it's fun. I mean, again, it's faster than movies. Right. It's exercising the muscle. It's sometimes getting an opportunity to work with an artist that you don't have the right movie to work with. So,
and do a lot of these directors, are they directors that you've worked with, or are they just specifically jingle people?
No, what do you mean the directors?
I mean the directors of the commercials.
I mean, it started out because I started realizing that this was something to do because the directors that I was working with were getting asked to do commercials, and they were asking me to work on the commercials.
So that's how you got into it.
Yeah, that's how I got into it. But then generally, I don't. It doesn't necessarily. It's not generally not a director-driven. Enterprise.
Right. We did a cool one down in New Orleans.
Really?
That was fun.
Yeah, Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah.
Oh, the
Wild Turkey.
Was that where he's playing the piano or something? Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. July 4th weekend.
That's right.
July 4th weekend, 2017?
No.
2018?
No.
More
later, way back.
2016? No.
Yeah.
He seems.
But it wasn't late. It wasn't earlier than 2016. If that's got to be the far end of it.
His persona seems very intense, but I would bet he's like a cool dude, right?
He's great.
He was great. In fact, when I did a record down in Austin, he hung out at the studio.
Yeah.
Nice. At Willie's place?
Yeah.
He's just who you think he is.
He's pretty amazing.
What you see is what you get.
So he is intense.
Yeah, but he's very amused.
And he's
very
professional.
Approachable. Yeah, very.
But he was. I mean, he's done so much great stuff. But in The Wolf of Wall Street, that's kind of that's a crowning moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that improvised? Like, did he?
I think he brought some of that too. Right. I think he brought some of that.
Remember that?
The pounding his chest like the Indian. I think he brought that to it.
Yeah.
Hey, it takes a village to make a movie.
But at the very, very beginning,
right?
Were you going to direct?
No.
You were never going to direct?
No, I can't see. So I felt like there was always somebody who would be better off handling the visual element. But, it began really with just, the first thing I did was I wrote a script with a friend of mine about the college radio station. And then people wanted to buy the script. And then me and my friends decided we wanted to try to make the movie. And we did. And we were accepted into the lab at Sundance. It was called A Matter of Degrees. It came out in 1990.
Amazing.
And it was sort of at that moment where what they had been calling college radio had become alternative music. I know you know that moment very clearly.
Yeah, sure do.
And we recorded a lot of songs and placed the songs. And then I just realized that what I wanted to do is I wanted to work with great film directors. And that if I made music my focus, which I really enjoyed doing, and I always had the twin passions of music and movies, that would sort of be the point of contact, and that's how it worked out. I mean, I got lucky.
What was the break? But what was the point where you really got in there? Because obviously, if you're getting into a new thing,
I think people saw the first movie, and I think that what I pride myself in is that I feel like I'm a filmmaker, where I work to have the music be basically a part of the dramatic landscape, really, where it's about storytelling, really, where you succeed or fail in your ability to transmit a story. So, I think that my experience where the first thing I did was really produce a movie and utilize music to its best effect and have it be an inherent element in the story, that gave me sort of an insight that I think a lot of people don't get right away. And then in terms of the break, I guess the break really was that I worked on Kids, and that was
cool.
that was sort of the movie that sort of really got a lot of attention.
Was that the song with the folk implosion?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow. That's Lou from Dinosaur Jr.
Right.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. At that moment, he was Lou from Sebadoh.
Right, because he wasn't in Dino at that point.
Right. So
That's
and so that was where, I mean, crazy enough, we had like the oddest thing about that movie, which is really such a great movie, is that song "Natural One" was like a top 40 hit, which was totally unexpected.
Right.
Yeah.
Was that driven by the movie that made it a hit?
I don't think so. I mean, Lou did the score for the film, and so there was this piece of music that I like encouraged him to put a lyric on. And it just took off. I don't think it was the kind of thing where we had the record came out on London Records, and they and I you know, again, it was like that was one of those records where like people heard that record was like, that record's got it going on, and so I think people just sort of like thought, I think this can work on the radio, and then we got it did work.
Amazing.
Did we talk about just like in high school? Were you super psyched on like what was the music like? When did the musical thing click with you?
It was just really early on. I mean, it's just that I feel very lucky that I felt like I lived through all the golden eras of music.
I think we.
Yeah,
so, whether I know that like at 5 years old, I have a recollection of like wanting to go to Woodstock. I don't know if that's that's an imagined memory.
Wow.
But it was always I talk about a lot about how we would make friends by like you'd go into a dorm room or somebody's bedroom and you'd like look at their records, and like all your friends, sort of everybody had certain records,
posters on
and you would be able
Right.
to sort of kind of figure out if you were going to be able to be friends by virtue of like what was in their record collection.
Yeah,
Okay,
What might have been in your record collection going to college? Like when you went.
Well,
up there,
the two big records I remember, the biggest records that I took with me to college were Talking Heads, Remain in Light, and Can't Stop the English Beat,
Nice.
and all of Elvis Costello's records.
That's so great because
Yeah.
you've gotten to work with him.
Yeah, I've worked with him a lot. I love Elvis. We've used him on Boardwalk Empire. We used him on vinyl.
Like, was there an inspiration to the music you liked? Was it like an older brother or parents, or
no,
you just found it yourself?
Yeah,
The radio?
I guess so. I mean, the radio was growing up in New York. There was all sorts of radio to
Scott
listen
Muni?
to. Yeah, just whether it was on the AM side or on the FM side, and then you could see what the cultural influences were. Whether it was like just off the top of my head, records that always meant a lot to me were just say like Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, Deja Vu, After the Gold Rush by Neil Young.
Yeah.
I remember watching the California Jam. I remember that was like sort of a moment where, the Eagles played Already Gone, and then that was really, to me, that was really a gateway to country music that I've always really loved very passionately. So really feel very lucky in that way, Tommy, all the Rolling Stones records.
You're a big Stones guy.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and then movie-wise, really, I think seeing American Graffiti was a real turning point for me.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
And that sort of opened me up both to a world of music, but also I think that was a trigger of saying like, oh, music and movies.
Yeah.
Right.
And just always again, like all of us, hanging out in record stores.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That was really where you sort of made your way. And again, growing up in New York and having a lot of things accessible, and we used to go see 5 movies in a weekend.
Right.
Wow.
And
But I think part of where you were going was like none of it, at least for me, and it sounds like for you as well, and probably for you as well, that it wasn't planned.
Right.
It wasn't in high school. You went, I'm going to be a music supervisor.
No, I really had no clue whatsoever.
Right.
I somehow managed to graduate college without any notion that I really needed to do anything after that.
Right.
I don't know how that happened.
Right. But this certainly wasn't on your radar.
No,
like,
and
I'm
also
going to do
it
this.
wasn't
even an occupation.
It wasn't
Right.
really an occupation. Where now, again, it's sort of like I get, they teach music supervision in schools,
Right.
in film schools, or whatever, and I get, I get an email every couple of weeks from some kid who's, this is my dream job, this is what I
Right.
want to do. And it's funny because there's been so much, like I said, there's been so much good fortune or so much circumstantial things that seem circumstantial that if somebody said, if somebody looked to say, well, what was the path of your career? And I would sort of lay out what happened. I mean, I think I would just faint probably just because how do you plot that? I don't know how you do it.
I think my point is it kind of, your love takes you there or your passion takes you there.
Right.
Destiny.
Right.
In my case, density.
Well, density. But you probably more intentionally, I mean, when you started at the record plant, you probably knew you were going to do it, or?
I mean, more before that when I was putting together stuff at Eventide, and, there was a recording studio upstairs. I mean, I didn't think I was going to end up there, but I started bumming out on college and, I could get the job at the record plant.
Right.
So I did it. My parents weren't super mad, which was amazing.
Right. But look at us now.
But my other thing I was thinking about with you is I don't, in my case, I don't necessarily think if it wasn't for my older brothers, I don't know if I would like the music I liked. Because I heard they played this stuff in the house,
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm just fascinated that, you just found it on your own.
Well, I mean, the great thing about it is there's this eternal kind of archaeology in the sense of where one thing leads you to another. I mean, as long as I've been digging, I've still am unearthing things, right? It was the music that led me to something else, or I used to say it's kind of reading liner notes is really what kind of led, created a map for me to sort of explore certain things where, okay, so Neil Young, then Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, Neil Young took you back to Buffalo, Springfield, and so, those things you just sort of keep going back and saying what influenced what, I mean, certainly I had friends who had older siblings, right? So I don't know that I would have been on New Riders of the Purple Sage if it wasn't for Jay Goldberg's sister,
Oh, Jay Goldberg's sister.
She was the deadhead?
Yeah. So, I don't know, or why I discovered the Beach Boys when I did, in that sort of fallow period. But a lot of it was just looking at the graphics in record stores and what seemed cool. And
you grew up in the city?
Yeah.
Where?
Upper West Side in the Bronx,
Perfect.
But you're still looking for stuff for pleasure.
Always.
For pleasure.
Always for pleasure.
That's great.
I think that's kind of a perfect way to
tie it up.
Yep.
Tie it up.
All right.
Thank you, Randy. That was really great.
Randy, awesome. Okay.